Our next speaker is Mark Popadick, who is a survivor of chronic myelogenous leukemia. He was diagnosed at the age of 15 and underwent a bone marrow transplant in 1987. His brother was his donor. Mark was then diagnosed with thyroid cancer in 2007 and he had a relapse of his leukemia in 2011, and is currently on maintenance therapy and is doing very well. A graduate of Fordham University, Mark has worked in information technology, consulting, and recruiting. And what you'll see, I think, and what you'll hear, is the wonderful example that Mark gives us of ongoing survivorship. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. It's great to be here today. And I wanted to start off by saying I realize I'm just a little bit of the eye candy before the other really, really good-looking guy gets up here. So. But it's great. It's great to be here. Well, I had a very random conversation a few days ago. Kind of went all over the board, and in the course of the conversation, this guy commented to the effect that I have some really random medical knowledge. When that happens, I usually respond with some kind of medical mumbo jumbo, and then tell him, I usually respond by saying, I'm a 2.5-time cancer survivor. It comes with the territory. That usually stops those overly curious types in their tracks and befuddles them just enough that I can kind of mosey on away and escape scot-free. But really, I often ask myself, what does being a cancer survivor actually mean, let alone a 2.5-time survivor? Don't get me wrong, I love the word, but my mind can grasp the notion a lot better. How do you survive a memory? How do you survive chronic or ongoing ailments? So that's my little preamble. I figured I'd start off by giving a little background, and we can kind of go from there. As Mary said, I was diagnosed with CML in 1986. It's a form of leukemia that affects about 5,000 patients a year in the U.S., mostly adults with the median age of 66. I was 15 at the time, and instead of doing things most teenagers were doing, and probably a few things I shouldn't have been doing anyways, I was taking this mandatory crash course in medicine and science. Back then, the only potential cure for CML was a bone marrow transplant. I was one of 9 kids living in Buffalo, New York, but the very good hospital up there wasn't doing transplants at the time. So my parents and I came to this place whose name to me sounded more like a fancy law firm than hospital. Sloan Kettering. Little did I know it would be the start of a 26-year relationship with this place. It took a lot of sacrifice on behalf of my family, neighbors, friends, all on my behalf, because logistically, being treated at a hospital a few hundred miles away was different and difficult. I mean, my parents left 8 kids at home, ages 1 to 17. They left their jobs for weeks at a time, but after first walking through those doors right across the street, you see right away this is a special place, and that made the sacrifice worth it in the hopes of a positive outcome. It was my first go-round, so you never know what you're getting into in those days. The 19th floor of the main hospital was the high-risk transplant unit, which incidentally had great views across the East River and the 59th Street, so that helped pass the time to a certain degree. And the treatment consisted of 5 days of radiation, 3.5 times a day, followed by 2 days of chemo. And it took away the cancer, but it also wiped out everything else, including my immune system. It was very intense, but luckily, I had 3 genetic matches, including my brother Dan, who's here tonight. That took a little bit of the worrying away. You can keep going. His ego likes that, so if you want. And after a grueling, sweaty, and vomit-stained week, it was the day for transplant. August 18th, my 16th birthday. But the way I was feeling, I wasn't sure if this was going to be a rebirth or an apocalypse. For 8 weeks, I lived a boy-in-the-bubble type existence. I was in isolation, a sort of space-age, germ-free environment. And yes, they call it isolation for a reason, as I isolated myself as much as possible in every sense of the word. Back then, for about 18 months, there was an enormous amount of attention thrown my way. And when you have family and friends and classmates greeting you with tears in their eyes, it added a layer of pressure I wasn't equipped to deal with. I didn't want to be a burden. So when asked how I was, I tried to offer a very polite, "I'm doing well, thanks for your concern, much obliged, I love you too, you're great, but I would love you a lot more if you stayed over there." It wasn't out of fear or pessimism, I just didn't like the fuss and wanted to fly under the radar as much as humanly possible and not get too close to anyone should things go south. A year post-transplant, I was declared cancer-free, but that emotional isolation stayed with me, and it came very naturally. It was inherent and was often the way I dealt with everything, both cancer and non-cancer related. Don't get me wrong, I could certainly function very well in society and turn on the charm when needed, but I went that way and tried conquering the world on my own, probably until my early 30s. But little by little, those walls started to come down. It started when I had two friends who were diagnosed with cancer, one who actually needed a transplant. It hit me. I was sitting on this dusty treasure chest of stories filled with hope and resilience, but realized it doesn't do anyone good if you don't share it. You need to be open to it and share it. And since I never talked about it, the impact was immense among those friends and their spirits being lifted, and they saw there was hope and that people had gone before them and been okay. The shoe was on the other foot at that time, and I wanted to help. This was what all the fuss was about towards me 15 years ago. I always got it, but this time I was just open to accepting it. I saw and felt a lot of what people saw and felt when I was first diagnosed. The process came slowly, but the openness has served me well since. Going through a 2-year stretch where I had a hip replacement, most likely a result of radiation from my original treatment, and a bout with thyroid cancer in 2007, and it served me well in 2011 when I diagnosed again with CML. Thankfully, through all this, I never really flinched. And part of that confidence is represented by the doctors, nurses, and researchers at Memorial Sloan Kettering. Going way back, there was Dr. Joel Brockstein, the first person I ever met here, and really the face of Memorial Sloan Kettering to me in those early years. His partner, Al Gilio, also on the transplant team, and always so calm and cool. Dr. Fareed Boulad, still around after all these years, and if you don't know him, find him, because he's the man, and you'll see why when you meet him. I transitioned over to Dr. Kevin Offinger and the long-term follow-up team in 2007, Joanne, Roseanne, and Beth, who know me as well as I know myself, and I can't blow off appointments without their calling me on it. Then there's Dr. Hugo Castro. He is my current lead on the transplant team now. I mean, what can you say about a doctor who's so professional and smart and also gives you dating advice? Doesn't get any better. His team of Margaret, Allie, and Abby, I'm blessed to have them on my team as well. And I probably rattled off that list with a smile, but for 26 years, I think, oh crap, where would I be as a person if I hadn't gone through all of this? It took me a while, but accepting the love and grace and friendship of everyone I came into contact with was that powerful. You gotta love life's twists and turns. So now when someone asks me how I am, I actually give them an answer. And when people ask how they can help, I often tell them I'm okay, but help the cause. There's so many ways to do it. You can share your own story. You can volunteer. You can register and get tested for the National Bone Marrow Donor Program. Maybe for you, it's getting involved with Sloan Kettering Cycle for Survival, or organizing a weekend of desperate fun to take the patient's mind away from his ongoing treatment. Sometimes it's just listening to a good old-fashioned bitch session, because when you're in the midst of treatment, cancer is awfully a daily grind, offering no pardon and no parole. You need outlets. So, what is a survivor to me these days? Well, it's more from being a one-dimensional, I'm here, great sort of thing, into something that is much greater. I think it's about suiting up and showing up every day. It's about sharing your experiences, sharing your love, sacrifice, celebrating resiliency and determination, and bringing that out into the greater world. That's all we've got. That's all I've got. Thank you so much.